Hi, happy Friday, everyone. So today this is not quite a live tasting because I do believe whenever it comes to tasting Burgundy, Burgundy is one of those wines I talk about over and over again that changes through different phases and different tastes. They open up, they close down, they develop through a long period of time. So it's not really something I can just taste live and tell you how it tastes like 5 minutes after it's been opened. You really need to go back to taste it 15 minutes after, 30, 45, an hour, 2 hours. It will continue to change depending on the producer and the vintage. But today we're going to talk about a very special wine. This is a 2013 Bouchard's Baby Jesus Vineyard. It is a red Burgundy, so 100% Pinot Noir from a Premier Cru in Côte de Beaune. It is a monopole, which means the winery are the sole owner of this parcel, and it's called the Baby Jesus parcel. It's considered the center part of this Premier Cru inside the Greves, and is considered the best site. And Baby Jesus is kind of an interesting name for a vineyard. How it got its name was back in the days, the land was owned by the Carmelite nuns, and the nun predicted back then that the birth of King Louis XIV, even though at the time his mother, Queen Anne of Austria, was supposedly not able to give birth, but the nun predicted the birth of King Louis XIV prior to she was able to give birth. And people were really overjoyed in the country of France, so they decided to name her vineyard the vineyard of the Christ child, to honor the nun who predicted the birth of King Louis XIV. Now, Bouchard is also a very historical and very interesting producer in all Burgundy. This is probably one of the biggest and the most, comprehensive producer and negotiant in all Burgundy. So they actually are one of the oldest merchants in Burgundy, started back in 1731. Then they acquired more land, became negotiants, started making wine as the year goes on. And they actually have about 130 hectares of different crus and 30 classified Grand Cru and 183 classified Premier Crus spread out Burgundy, which is amazing. And I think this is a great producer if you're starting to learn about Burgundy, to get to know, because they have so many different land and different crus throughout Burgundy. You really get a great grasp of a different region. And they also, you can kind of see, I think, on their back, not on this one, because this one is their Baby Jesus Vineyard, so they have a Baby Jesus on there. But in their other bottling, on the label, you will see their chateau. It is built back in the 15th century, and is one of the 5 original tower that still remains today, the chateau and whatever have you. And it's also where they keep a lot of their historical wine, and is open for people to visit once the pandemic's over. I highly recommend, if you're thinking about learning Burgundy and going to Beaune, go visit their winery, just because they have such a great range of wine. So let's get to it. One of the reasons why I think people love this wine is I think it's one of the best expression of this Premier Cru you can find. And we are tasting the 2013 vintage, which sometimes is considered not as good of a vintage. But I talked to the importer for the wine. They did a very heavy declassifying and sourcing through 2013. I always talk about, in a quote-unquote good vintage, you have to be an idiot not to make good wine. But in a vintage that's as difficult as 2013, that's where you really challenge the winemakers and the producer's talent. The color, I would say it is about a ruby red. I actually was not expecting much from the 2013 vintage as well. So I just poured it, and I'm quite impressed with how intense and how pure and how expressive and how floral this wine is. It's got a lot to give right off the bat on the nose. So I probably opened this and poured this about 5 minutes ago. The intensity is still really high. From the 2013, a lot of other producers, I find the wines to be a little, or the smell to be really light on intensity, which I'm not finding in this wine. Right off the bat, it's actually very savory. I get a lot of that red floral, the chalky, dusty cherry notes to it. That's very classic of the Burgundy style, but it's not wet and grassy and unripe like a lot of the other 13 I've tasted. It's actually quite savory and got a lot of umami going on. I really like that earthy, dusty notes in there. And what's really impressive, I think, is the intensity on the nose. Yeah, but I've just opened it, so we'll see how it develops in a little bit. But the first impression, so far so good. On the mouth, the wine is a lot more masculine. On the mouth, the wine is got a lot more chew, more tannin. It's a little more rustic, whereas on the nose, the wine is showing more elegance, more fruits, and more floral notes. But on the mouth, it's actually quite chewy. It is not quite as dense as quote unquote the riper vintage like 09, 2010, 2015. It's going down a little easier. It's not quite as weighty and heavy and full body as those vintage, but it's still very satisfying. Off the bat, I like the wine. I think it's drinking really well right off the bottle, but we will come back in about 15-30 minutes and I'll give you a live update, a quick like 30 seconds to a minute, every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes to kind of tell you how this wine developed through its aeration and see how long this wine will last. And then we'll put it together. Sounds good? All right, see you in a bit. Okay, so it has been about 30 minutes to 45 minutes since I opened this bottle. The Burgundy is still continuing to climb. It's still very expressive. The spiciness of the wine is starting to come out, but it hasn't gotten to a shutdown stage, nor is it over its peak yet. But you can very obviously see and taste and feel the difference between when we first opened the bottle until now. When we first opened it was very floral, very cherry driven, very fruit driven. And now about 40 minutes later, this wine is very spice and herbal driven. So it's very spicy. And then the palate is actually becoming a little bit fuller as well. And again, that is the beauty and the fun part about tasting Burgundy slowly, is to see how it develops through the lens of which you're tasting it. So yep, we'll come back in about anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes or an hour. We'll tell you how it develops. Okay, so it has been about an hour and a half since this bottle's been open. So right at the 1 hour mark, it did a very classic Burgundy thing of shutting down. There was no aroma, everything's very muted, the body was really tight, they just weren't pulling anything out of this wine. And now, about an hour and a half later, this bottle is starting to get to what I call the sweet spot. Like, I feel like Burgundy always goes to this up and down, and it's always really cool if you sip it slowly and eventually get to that place where everything just comes together. So right now, the fruits and the florals coming back. You still get a savoriness. I'm still getting a lot of earthiness. Acidity is really kicking in once you swallow the wine. And it's combining beautifully on the palate. And this is making me want some duck breast right now. Yeah, so absolutely enjoyable wine. It is actually quite delicious as soon as you open it, and you will see, if you have the time, to let it age and let it open up and sip it every 15 minutes for the first like hour and a half and watch it go through that different stage. And I think for a bottle of wine that is considered a monopole, but from quote unquote like lesser vintage, it is showing extremely well. And the price point that we get for the last couple of cases are pretty attractive. So if you're interested, give it a go and taste together and leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thank you. Have a great day.